Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. One of the big promises that Emperor Palpatine made to the average commoner when he ended the Republic was that he would bring order and stability to the galaxy. The Clone Wars had been a crazy 4 years of devastating conflict. Galactic trade was completely shattered. Worlds heavily dependent on imports faced massive upticks in commodity prices for basic goods. This created more poverty and led to more crime and despair, which only added to the already huge migrant crisis caused by refugees fleeing the Outer Rim and the conflict that was setting entire systems ablaze. These are all very kinetic and visible results of the conflict that was honestly terrifying the average person in the galaxy. And that terror rallied the populace around a strong leader. Everyone agreed that the war needed to be stopped. There was no opposition to that. But the Senate legislators had grown fat and lazy after centuries of peace and prosperity, and the last thing they wanted to do was to make the hard decisions that would make the Republic a more resilient and prosperous place after the war. Hard decisions that required finding funding for a standing military and building and repairing infrastructure to further connect the galaxy together was just not the kind of work the Senate did anymore. Now it was just about maintaining power and the privilege and wealth that came with living on Coruscant. Many senators have become jaded and cynical about the very political process they were supposed to partake in, and who can blame them? I mean, how do you run a galaxy-wide republic with so many different species, cultures, and opinions in the first place? The base state of the galaxy has always been chaos, and if you do serve in the Senate, especially if you've been in the Senate for a long time, it's very easy for an individual to become burnt out and just kind of give up on everything. Of course, as Star Wars fans, we do get to meet the few that did care. These were very special individuals like Bail Organa from Alderaan, Padme Amidala from Naboo, the Bud Knight from Anheuser-Busch, and of course, Mon Mothma from Chandrilla. But again, these were the exception. Rare individuals with very strong principles and an attitude towards service that usually doesn't equate to securing political power, unfortunately. And it's because these individuals were few in number, no one was able to stop Palpatine from taking over. I mean, don't get me wrong, this idea of one person coming in with all the power who can solve everything with just the wave of the hand is a great idea. Like, I would love to see that happen. Said every person who doesn't understand how the world works or how the galaxy works or how governance works. It's not only horribly stupid to entrust all of these responsibilities to one person, it's just impossible for that kind of scenario to end up well. A smart leader depends on strong and well-built institutions to carry out their plans and potentially even balance out their own power and excesses when they, start to lose their mind. The sad truth is, incapable people, moral people, individuals who would actually be terrific at running a government system rarely have the abilities or are willing to stoop low enough to win a political election. In many ways, running for office and then running an actual government are two completely different skill sets. This is a significant problem that most republics face. Populists like Palpatine operate in a very simplistic way. They dumb down extremely complex issues into simple moral struggles that pits oftentimes unrelated groups in society against each other. This creates a very emotional political movement that is easy for people to relate to, but actually lacks any depth or understanding of the actual problems the galaxy faces. There is war and unrest and secession in the Outer Rim. The only way we can face this challenge is if you dismantle the democratic institutions of a republic and allow me to build a massive military force. Now, if you watch this channel, you might point out, well, Alan, that sounds like a bad idea. That's basically how every authoritarian state emerged in our own galaxy. But, the truth is the average person did not pay attention in civics class. They didn't really enjoy social studies like you did. That's okay, because we're actually the weird ones for liking this stuff. But almost everyone understands how horrific war is and how much damage it was causing to the average person's life. And a solution, any solution to the fighting, was more important to these voters, suffering to the Clone Wars, than some abstract political term like checks and balances, term limits, and democracy. But the sad truth is, Palpatine's type of populism is rarely concerned about solving problems. What it really is good at is identifying real problems and mobilizing people's emotions in order to gain political power. Populists always begin to emerge when democracies or republics are in the decline because of years of mismanagement, corruption, and just an inability to create proper reform to adjust to the reality on the ground for the average person. Whereas normal politicians will talk about struggles and big challenges that populations must face after the Clone Wars, maybe even austerity measures, rationing of food and energy to help affected worlds, the populists like Palpatine will do the easy thing and make promises that they have no intention or more likely no ability to actually keep. We're going to create billions of jobs. We're going to secure the entire Outer Rim. We're going to bring order and prosperity to the galaxy like you've never seen. It's going to be wonderful. And because politicians like Palpatine end up shortcutting their way to power using devious means, whenever they are actually in power, they lack the skills and abilities to actually manage or run anything. To make matters worse, the actual failing institutions that are designed to protect the galaxy from individuals like this are the only ones that can really resist. Only organizations like the Jedi Order understand how dangerous it is to have a Sith Lord run the entire galaxy. But of course, Palpatine will attack the Jedi Order for its failures to protect the galaxy and their business and political connections. And while the Jedi do deserve the criticism, there is a much larger and bigger danger. The same thing could be said about the delegation of 2000. 2,000 senators who were brave and courageous enough to sign a letter asking for Palpatine to sit down and then give back all of the emergency powers he received at the beginning of the Clone Wars. Palpatine will paint these individuals as benefactors of the old corrupt Coruscant patronage system, and truth be told, many of these senators might be guilty, but that doesn't mean their warning and cries shouldn't be heeded. But nuance dies, ironically, when politics become really important to the average person. When the everyman can no longer ignore who the leader is in Coruscant. With higher voter turnout, also unfortunately comes more uninformed and easily manipulated people who oftentimes are tricked into voting against their own interests. I think it's a highly cynical and undemocratic view to have of the world. It's also a bit arrogant. But yeah, I sometimes think this. I'm sure a lot of people do too. But the reality is all we really need is a return to good education, putting civics at the front of the syllabus rather than as an afterthought. I mean, we need to return to a system where more and more children and kids are engaged in their civic duty and understand how our government is run and how it works. But anyway, when Palpatine became Scrotus POTUS, there's this illusion that things are going to get better. We have massive battleships crowding the space lanes in the core. We have millions and millions of young men signing up to serve in the Imperial military or the public sector. It seems like the Empire was finally going to pacify and make the galaxy a safer place. But what does that mean? What does making the galaxy safe actually entail? Well, the Separatists were chased down and destroyed as they were genuine threats to the Empire's political dominance. But what about criminal organizations? What about all of the bandits and raiders that Palpatine promised to fight so that there would be security in the Outer Rim? Well, if you go to worlds like Vardos and Ganther in the core regions, these worlds experienced an economic and cultural renaissance. Imperial forces drastically cut down the amount of crime and raiders in these systems, mostly a side effect of the Clone Wars, and as a result, peace was actually restored to these worlds, and they became a great source of manpower for Palpatine's economic, political, and military machine. But if you head out to the Outer Rim, it's very much the same thing that it's always been, as in very little federal law enforcement presence, no military presence, very little stability. If you're unlucky enough to live on a former Separatist world, your planet will be occupied heavily by Imperial troops, and heavy taxes and restrictions will be placed on the people. On worlds like Jalukan, for instance, only a small handful of children were allowed to join the Imperial cadet system and serve in the military, which is very much the only way people like this can reach the middle class and have some kind of economic power. And so like every political leader before him, Emperor Palpatine returned to the normal routine. Solidify a power base near the core where all the political, economic, and military power is concentrated, and exploit and neglect the Outer Rim. Although in the Empire's case, they really ramped up the exploitation to another level. So we tend to think that the political leaders we vote for will somehow redefine and shape the office that they're running for, when in reality it's usually the other way around. The office will reshape and define that political person you have voted for, because no one really understands what leadership in these higher offices are like until you actually get into that position. And a lot of extremists, a lot of populists, they will moderate once they understand their responsibilities and just how difficult the system they have taken over is to actually run. Other individuals like Palpatine, when they realize how chaotic it is to run a government system, will just try to reject everything. He'll reject responsibility, he'll reject checks and balances, and most of the major changes that Palpatine actually made were just aesthetic. I mean, they threw some gray paint on the Venator-class Star Destroyer and V-Wing, they removed the colorful paint from the clones and rebranded Imperial clone troopers. All the boring information gathering and regulatory bodies that manage things like galactic standards and taxation, they all stayed the same because Palpatine honestly just didn't have the capability to do anything with them or to reform any of these organizations. He was barely smart enough to understand not to mess with them. Palpatine's main goal was to basically destroy or limit every institution or organization that checked his power. He wanted free reign over everything. And surprises, more and more institutions were disbanded or filled with sycophants and regime loyalists. The Empire stopped functioning properly as well. In some cases, the Empire worked directly with Zygerian slave cartels to get manpower for large resource extraction projects. By the time the Galactic Civil War was in full swing, the Empire basically had their own slavers. Or they would just take prisoners from the, prison system and use them in labor camps. If I recall, the Wookiees of Kashyyyk were also excellent for manual labor, but had to be controlled with tiny bombs placed inside their heads. Wookiees aren't afraid of dying or going down like a warrior, but Imperial Grand Moff Tolruk, who was in charge of Kashyyyk, was a complete bastard psychopath and would threaten to detonate the bombs in children's and women's heads in order to get the larger male Wookiees to work for them. Speaking of Tolruk, it was individuals like him, a Grand Moff, that actually ran the galaxy or handled the day-to-day operations in a lot of these sectors, and that was a big problem. See, during the Clone Wars, Palpatine had already started eroding the institutions that protected the galaxy from too much concentration of power in one branch. In the name of efficiency and security, Palpatine took away the responsibility of local governments, local sector governments, and local elected officials, and basically appointed his own personal governor to watch over the resources and the taxation of these sectors. The sector governor position eventually evolved into the Moff position, and it was really the Moffs that ran the Empire. These were not elected officials in any way. These were oftentimes just former military leaders who had a close political connection to Palpatine himself. And oftentimes their only qualification for these positions was, again, that personal loyalty. Now, in the best case scenario, a sector governor would allow the existing politicians and bureaucrats to run the sector's day-to-day operations. And instead, what a sector governor really focused on was meeting specific imperial quotas for the military or economic production, or rooting out some kind of insurgency group that was affecting the area. The reality was a sector governor's job was pretty vast and, hard to describe. I mean, really, their tasks varied from system to system. Like most imperial leadership positions, there are no rules or consequences until there are. But what really gets you into trouble is not breaking the law or even messing up in a big way. It's just, if you manage to attract Palpatine's attention and focus, then you tend to be screwed. A governor, in my opinion, has a lot of advantages over a Moff. They are elected by their constituents, and they are held accountable by those constituents. They must constantly prove they are worthy of that position at each election. A Moff is the Emperor's representative in the local sector, and his words are backed by Star Destroyers and armed troopers. There are no consequences if he fails the people. There is actually no need to serve the people. There is only a need to kick up any revenue you collect to your boss. Like capos to their don, like main men who pretend to be all about their neighborhood and community when in fact they're just parasitic and, keeping all the gabagool for themselves. In my opinion, when the sector governors took over the leadership at the sector level, the galaxy entered what I like to call its Imperial Warlord stage. And once Emperor Palpatine died, all of these warlords started emerging, right? They no longer had to hide what the hell they were doing. They just moved on to their final stage. All the Imperial remnant military leaders that we see post-Jakku are not simple governors or professional military guys. Through their tenure, these individuals had amassed a great amount of personal power and resources. This is why after Palpatine dies, instead of reshuffling the chain of command and reconnecting the Empire, every Moff used their own contacts, their own back channels to secure more power and wealth for themselves. At this point in the video, it should not surprise anyone that the Imperial period also represented a golden age for criminal syndicates. It was a dangerous time for criminals, for sure, as the Empire was the biggest mafia of them all and couldn't really be trusted, but cooperation between criminal syndicates and the Empire were at an all-time high and at every level of governance. Whether you're a local Imperial supply officer, the Grand Moff, or Darth Vader himself, a lot of Imperials were dealing directly with criminals, which again is ironic because they're supposed to be the law and order authoritarian kind of faction, right? Ironically, no one got the Empire better than the criminal scum, as the Empire had no ideology, no moral compass, no values. All they cared about was seizing and maintaining power. And so, I guess in a kind of refreshing way, the Empire was willing to work with everyone. See, the Empire didn't try to stop crime. They tried to regulate it and profit it and, control it. And so the Empire had very close connections to the Hutt cartels. They treated them like any other business entity. They received a portion of their illicit business profits. And in return, the Hutts stayed in their territory for the most part and also gave the Empire access to their network of informants and even some of their bounty hunters for various jobs. The Empire also had dealings with the Crimson Dawn, who they believed was a stabilizing power. Of course, Palpatine didn't realize that Maul was actually in charge of that organization and secretly planning to overthrow his government. The Black Suns was essentially a private army that the Empire could use for dirty work when they didn't want anything to get traced back to them. Need a death squad to kill an annoying CEO? Do you need some unmarked starships and weapons to make an accident happen in the hyperspace lanes? Black Suns will get you everything. Then you have the Pike Syndicate, essentially a narco state that pumped the population full of spice. The Empire would selectively enforce drug laws, maybe seize more stimulants and allow more downers to get through so you could slowly pacify your population with some good old spice. With the Empire, nothing is as it seems, and nothing is as Palpatine says. The Galactic Empire wasn't a strong state that lost its way, as some revisionists might label it. It was a protection racket that calls itself a government. And that's because most criminals like Palpatine are just lazy opportunists. And trust me, I know this because I myself am also a lazy opportunist. And lazy opportunists never want to do things the right way. They definitely don't want to govern the galaxy properly, tackle systematic problems at their root, instead of just merely covering up the symptoms. Lazy opportunists look for shortcuts. They look for quick and easy ways to generate wealth and success. And that oftentimes, if they're not capable, if they're not smart, that hurts other people and that gets them into a lot of trouble. And when you're a Sith Lord, that's basically all you do. The truth is, Palpatine had a great opportunity to rebuild the galaxy in his own image and in his own name. He could have made a paradise after the Clone Wars. I mean, he basically destroyed everything. They were ready for a rebuild. That would have been the slow and sure and hard way of seizing power and building a legacy that would last tens of thousands of years. He could have proven that the Sith were actually the more logical group of Force users. He could have completely destroyed the galaxy by showing the galaxy how awesome the Sith were. And there's a reason why Warren Buffett will be remembered fondly by most, and Bernie Madoff will always be known as guys like Warren, they developed an investment strategy based on hard-learned lessons from trial and error. He taught other investors how to be disciplined, focused, avoid speculation, shortcuts, and he made them billions as well by putting in the work. And all that work is like generating $50 billion of net worth by MHF. And he'll be donating 99.5% of it. And that's on top of the $60 billion he's already donated to theirs. And this more than makes up for some of his more cold-hearted business. Whereas Bernie Madoff wanted to be respected by the world, like he wanted all the power, all of the niceties that comes with becoming a world-class investor. But he never had the skill or courage to pick stocks, to invest in his money. So he ended up running a Ponzi scheme that defrauded people of $65 billion. And so I guess the story of Palpatine is the Empire and the collapse that happens shortly after it's over. Is that evil is not always about a lack of moral values or just values. Oftentimes it's paired with incompetency and desperation. It's tied to people who want a lot and just don't have the capability to actually get what they want. And that's who Palpatine was. He was a great man. He was a very manipulative person. He really well, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to that notification. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.